Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes surviving is just the beginning of the battle? I survived the war, but I couldn't survive myself until I heard those voices singing. This phrase may sound poetic, but it's the raw truth of someone who returned home with their body intact, but their soul in pieces. The invisible scars were much heavier than any physical wound. There were sleepless nights, memories that insisted on returning, and the silence that screamed louder than any explosion. Have you ever felt that deep down, life had lost its meaning, even when everything around you seemed to be going on as normal? A soldier's return home is often portrayed as the end of one chapter, but in reality, it's just the beginning of another, even more painful one, because the war continues, only now within the mind and heart. It's a battle against memories that won't fade, against the guilt that corrodes, and against the loneliness that suffocates. And it's at this point that many stories are lost because the world sees the uniform, the medal, the handshake, but doesn't see the hidden tears that fall when the light fades. What no one sees are the invisible scars a veteran carries for the rest of their life. And it was precisely in the midst of this emotional abyss that something unexpected happened. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't an expensive treatment. It wasn't traditional therapy that opened the doors back to life. It was something simple, almost ordinary, yet profoundly transformative. The music of a church choir. Imagine the scene. Heavy footsteps, a hardened heart, and suddenly, a sound that seemed to pierce all the internal walls trauma had built. Have you ever felt a chill just listening to a song? Have you ever been moved without quite understanding why? I remember the impact the first time those voices rose together. It was as if each note had the power to stitch together the wounds no one else could reach. It was as if a greater force breathed life back into a heart that no longer believed in anything. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from where we expect. Sometimes restoration arrives disguised as a melody, a collective embrace, simple words that resonate deeper than any speech. The choir wasn't just music. It was a refuge. It was a space where the past didn't matter, where no one asked what you had or hadn't done. There, the soldier was seen neither as a hero nor a monster, but simply as someone in need of peace. And in that environment, for the first time in so long, the silence within me began to be filled with sounds that carried hope. Have you ever experienced that? That feeling of finally breathing after so long trapped underwater? What seemed like just a chance encounter with a group of in-tune voices became a turning point. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't magical, but it was real. And each rehearsal, each song, each Sunday became a piece of solid ground where before there had been only quicksand. Stay with me until the end, because this journey shows how the unexpected can change entire destinies. And so, step by step, that song rekindled something I thought was lost forever. A breath of life, an invitation to believe again. And it was at this point in the story, at this very moment when the voices began to pierce the darkness, that transformation began to take shape. Every time I remembered that first moment with the choir, it felt like a new flame was ignited within me. It was as if I had finally found a place where my pain didn't need to be hidden, but could be transformed. And in a way, that's what inspires me to share this story with you now. Because I know there are many people carrying invisible scars, fighting silent battles every day, and perhaps what they need is to hear that there is hope, that it's possible to start over. And here I want to open a space for you too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what's touched you most so far. It could be a memory, a feeling, or even a reflection on your own journey. Believe me, each comment isn't just a response to me, but an opportunity to create a support network where others can identify and find strength. And since we're on this journey together, please also take the opportunity to like this video. It may seem like a simple gesture, but when you press this button, you're helping this message reach more people who may need to hear it today. And if you feel that stories like this are valuable, that they can make a difference in someone's life, subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll not only continue to follow this type of content, but also become an active part of this community that believes in transformation, hope, and new beginnings. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people. Every comment, every like, and every subscription is like another voice joining this chorus of stories that cannot be silenced. And as I continue to tell how that encounter completely changed the course of my life, I want you to feel part of it too, because in some way we all need a place where we can be heard, welcomed, and reminded that we are never alone. When a soldier returns home, most people imagine the hardest part is behind them. But the hidden truth lies behind the scenes of this return. The body may be present, but the mind remains on the battlefield. The protagonist of this story carries within him something that many don't see, because it doesn't show up on X-rays or blood tests. These are the invisible scars, those that arise silently and manifest themselves in the most unexpected moments. There is no medal that can alleviate insomnia, no hug that can erase in one fell swoop the images that insist on repeating themselves night after night. He survived the bombs, the bullets, and the loss of comrades, but he still didn't know how to survive himself. Those around him saw a man who had accomplished his mission, who was back, seemingly safe, but inside him lay an abyss. The silence of the room at night became deafening, bringing back voices, explosions, and screams that should have been a thing of the past. The loneliness, even surrounded by family, was overwhelming, because how can you explain to someone what seems impossible to say? How can you put into words the weight of memories burning inside? This is the truth few understand. The external war ends, but the internal war can last a lifetime if there is no transformation. A soldier's mind upon returning is marked by decisions he never wanted to make, by impacts he never chose to experience, and worst of all is the emptiness of no longer knowing who one is, of feeling that there is no place in the world that fits that version of oneself. Life seems to go on, but inside everything is frozen. Invisible scars are cruel because no one notices when you're bleeding inside. No one sees when you fight mental battles while smiling politely. And that's exactly what he experienced. Entire days without being able to rest, eyes red from insomnia, a racing heart for no apparent reason, and a mind that wouldn't stop projecting images of pain. There were times when he even tried to fool himself, telling himself that everything was fine, that he just had to move on. But with each attempt to ignore them, the memories came back even stronger, as if his mind were screaming, demanding to be heard. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about invisible scars, we're not just talking about pain, we're also talking about identity. Imagine living with the constant feeling of being divided. On one side, the person everyone sees, steadfast, courageous, resilient. On the other, the broken human being, haunted by fears and a past they can't let go of. This contrast creates a kind of unbearable duality, as if two lives were happening simultaneously within the same person, and every daily decision becomes a burden, because even the simplest things carry a disproportionate weight. The impact of this goes far beyond the individual. This pain affects relationships, destroys bonds, undermines trust, and transforms the way he sees the world. He felt constantly out of place, like a stranger in his own house, a visitor in the place he once called home. Even trivial conversations about work, family, or the future seemed too distant, almost unreal, because his mind was still stuck in destructive scenarios. It's like trying to fit into a life that no longer fits, like wearing clothes that have outgrown and yet become suffocating. This soldier discovered that silence wasn't the absence of noise, but rather the suffocating presence of memories. In the middle of the night, he would get up and walk around the house as if searching for something he couldn't quite grasp. He looked at old photos and wondered who he had been before. There was a longing for himself, a nostalgia for his own peace, as if he were a stranger looking back at the life he lost. It's at this point that we realize how invisible scars are not just marks of war, but of stolen time, of interrupted hope, of joy that seems impossible to regain. And here's the harshest revelation. The world around him moved on, indifferent. Friends returned to their jobs, neighbors chatted about trivialities, and the clock ticked. Meanwhile, he felt paralyzed, as if trapped in a tunnel where time stood still. It was a kind of silent prison, a solitude camouflaged by everyday life. And as much love as there was around him, there was also the feeling that no one could truly understand the weight he carried. But despite all that darkness, there was a spark within him, almost imperceptible, that still lingered. A hidden desire to find something that would give meaning to life, to discover if it was still possible to rise. This is the journey we are about to follow. The transformation of someone who believed there was no way out, but was surprised by something so simple and yet so profound that it changed his life. And before we move on, I want to ask you one thing. Comment below. This makes sense to me. This little phrase shows that you're walking this journey together, and it might be just the connecting word another heart needs to find in the comments. After returning home, it seemed like the world was whole again, but inside him lay only ruins. The weight of silent grief was crushing, as if every minute were a reminder that something had been lost forever. He rose every day reluctantly, dragging his body as if carrying invisible armor. Life around him continued its usual rhythm. Cars passing, children playing, people talking about plans for the future. But to him, every sound was distant. Every conversation seemed to take place in another universe. He felt physically present but emotionally absent, like a spectator trapped behind a glass panel separating him from the rest of the world. Isolation became a refuge, albeit a suffocating one. The doors of his house rarely opened for visitors, and even when someone was around, he withdrew into himself. It was easier to remain silent than to try to explain the inexplicable. How could he put into words the confusion of emotions, the feeling that something inside was broken? The invisible scars prevented him from surrendering to companionship, and little by little, solitude began to seem like the only companion possible, even if it was a cruel one. In the early hours of the morning, when the city's silence took over, came the hardest moments. Memories infiltrated like invaders, images that appeared uninvited, comrades falling, the sounds of explosions, the heavy breathing of the race for survival. And at those times, the darkness of the room felt like an extension of the battlefield. There was no rest, no respite. The body was tired, but the mind relived the past. Insomnia became routine, and with it came dark thoughts, those that questioned whether it was even worth carrying on. The fear of never finding peace again became increasingly real. It was as if life had lost its color. What once brought pleasure no longer made sense. Food had no flavor. Conversations were dull. Time seemed to stand still. Every day he wondered if he was doomed to live trapped in this shadow forever. This was the invisible frame no one saw. On the outside, a man who had returned. On the inside, a broken heart. And in this emptiness, questions arose that hurt more than any memory of the war. Who am I now? What is my life for after everything I've seen? The shock of returning wasn't just external, it was internal. There was a disconnect between the world that went on as usual and the mind that was still frozen in moments of pain. It's at this point that hopelessness sets in, because it seems there's no place in the present for someone so trapped in the past. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because silent pain isn't just a feeling. It's a mental prison that robs us of clarity in our decisions. Everything begins to be seen through the lens of trauma. Every sudden noise is interpreted as a threat. Every innocent gesture seems suspicious. Every memory becomes a trigger. This war-shaped mindset creates a constant state of alert, as if the battle had never ended. And living like this in constant tension consumes not only physical energy but also the ability to dream. The impact is devastating. Dreams turn into nightmares, plans into memories of what will never be. With each passing day, he felt further from his former self. Childhood friends no longer recognized him. Relatives noticed the change but didn't know how to help. And what hurt most was realizing that even he no longer recognized his reflection in the mirror. It wasn't just the tired face, it was the dull eyes, the feeling of carrying an exhausted soul. The hidden truth of life after war is that, in many cases, the struggle to move on can be more cruel than the battle itself. And yet, there were moments when a spark would appear, a fleeting glimmer of desire for change, almost like a distant reminder that life could be more than pain. But these sparks were soon swallowed by the darkness of despair, and he would once again convince himself that perhaps finding a way back was impossible. It was as if his mind were pitted against his heart, locked in a contest, in which neither emerged victorious. This internal struggle shows how silent pain can shape not only emotions, but also the perception of all reality. He no longer saw possibilities, only limits. He no longer saw futures, only memories. And at this point, the line between living and simply existing became increasingly blurred. It's in this dark territory that many people give up, but it's also precisely there that something unexpected can happen and change everything. Right there, I'm on this journey too. I didn't know that open door would change everything. It was an ordinary late afternoon, one of those days when the weight of routine seemed unbearable, when the mind insisted on wandering through the dark corridors of memories that wouldn't let up. He walked aimlessly, almost as if running from himself, trying to find somewhere to simply breathe. It was in this torpor, this automatic movement, that his feet carried him to the front of a simple, almost hidden church, its doors half open. The sound coming from inside was discreet, but carried something different, like a flame amidst the chill that dominated within. Curious, he approached without much expectation. It was just another building, just another place in the city that seemed to have nothing to do with his life at that moment. But as he leaned against the door and heard those voices more clearly, something inside him trembled. It wasn't just music. It was as if each voice was a thread pulling out what was buried beneath layers of pain. It was too unexpected. A man who sought nothing found exactly what he needed most. He entered, still hesitant, as if invading a space that didn't belong to him. He sat in the back, trying to go unnoticed, but his heart was already restless. The choir was rehearsing a song that spoke of hope, of consolation, of rest. Words he himself had already abandoned in his life, but which, in that moment, seemed directed exclusively to him. It was as if there were a hidden revelation there, a message from behind the scenes of his own existence. You are not alone. There is something beyond the pain. With each chord, his mind was blown away. There were no gunshots, no explosions, just the harmony of human voices, simple yet full of meaning. The impact of this experience was overwhelming, because for the first time in a long time, the silence within him was interrupted by something that came not from trauma, but from hope. The music invaded places no conversation had reached, awakening emotions he thought were dead. There were tears, but they were different tears, not of despair, but of a weeping that cleansed, that freed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it wasn't just the music that touched him, but the sense of belonging. That community, that choir, seemed to function like a collective embrace, even though no one said anything directly to him. There was no judgment in their eyes, no pressure to explain his story. There was only acceptance, as if that space were a refuge for weary souls. It was proof that sometimes transformation begins in seemingly small details, but which have a gigantic impact. He realized he hadn't ended up there by chance. That unconscious decision to enter through the open door would become a turning point in his journey. Until then, every step had seemed lost, every choice seemed futile. But at that moment, a different mindset began to emerge. The idea that there might still be a path, that it was still possible to rebuild. The choir wasn't just music. It was an invitation to life, a way to reframe pain without having to deny it. It was like hearing the hidden truth he hadn't been able to see on his own, that peace can be found again, even after war. Little by little, the man began returning to church, not just to listen, but to feel. Each meeting became a kind of silent healing, a process of restoration that was unhurried, but progressed with each song. With each rehearsal, each Sunday, a piece of the void was filled. That collective sound, made up of such diverse voices, revealed that even the most fragmented parts of a life could come together into something beautiful, as long as there was a willingness to remain open. And perhaps this is the greatest mystery of this experience. It wasn't planned, it wasn't consciously sought, but it became the turning point in a story marked by pain. The open door of that church was more than a physical entrance. It was the passage to a new chapter, where the unexpected became an answer. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The first song began as a collective whisper that grew, filling every corner of that simple space until it reached something much deeper than the church walls. He hadn't expected to feel anything. After all, he'd already shielded himself from any attempt at emotion, like someone building a wall to protect themselves from further harm. But in that instant, when the voices joined in harmony, it was as if a fissure had opened in that wall. A shiver ran down his skin without warning, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to contain his reaction. It was as if each note were able to pierce the darkness that inhabited his mind, finding paths that reason couldn't reach. The tears came unexpectedly, not as cries of despair, but as a relief he hadn't even known he'd craved. They flowed silently, carrying an ancient weight, almost as if that melody had the power to wash away wounds that had never healed. His heart, which had previously beaten in time with memories of pain and fear, seemed to find a new rhythm, more serene, more human. It was a shock to feel that the hope he'd believed dead was still there, hidden, waiting only for the right moment to be reborn. The human warmth that came from those voices wasn't something that could be explained rationally. It wasn't about the perfection of the music nor about technique. It was about the dedication of each person singing, as if the union of so many voices could rebuild a broken life. He realized he wasn't just hearing a song, but receiving an invisible invitation to believe again. Each chord seemed to say, "You can still live, you still have value, and this revelation was so intense that it seemed almost impossible to bear, yet at the same time irresistible. The impact of that moment was so powerful that he felt as if he were being embraced without anyone touching him. It was a collective embrace made of sound, presence, and something beyond the human. Amidst the silent pain, a connection emerged that didn't depend on words. He realized he wasn't alone, even though he didn't recognize any of the faces before him. The music had created an invisible bridge, connecting his weary soul to the strength of a community expressing itself through the world's oldest art, song. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this moment revealed something essential about transformation. We often expect change to come from big decisions, spectacular revelations, or moments of glory, but the hidden truth is that life can be restored in seemingly small details. A simple song, sung by ordinary people, had a greater impact than any advice he had ever received. This shock of emotions showed that even a hardened heart can be touched when least expected, and that the journey back to life can begin in a moment of unexpected vulnerability. Hearing that first song, he realized he no longer needed to fight his invisible scars alone. The choir not only sang, but also transmitted an energy capable of rekindling the flame of hope. And it was at that moment that his mindset began to shift. As if the doors of his mind, previously locked, were opening to a different future. It wasn't an immediate cure, but it was the first step on a journey of revelations he never could have imagined. Right there, I'm on this journey too. With each passing week, something inside him began to shift. At first, it was almost imperceptible, like a light breeze barely felt, but it gradually transformed the atmosphere. The simple act of sitting in the church pew and listening to the choir sing brought a relief he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if each rehearsal were a pause in the storm, a moment when the weight of silent grief gave way to a sense of peace. And this feeling, however temporary, became a sign that perhaps it was possible to begin again. In the early days, he didn't dare get too close. He stayed in the back, listening, observing, without mingling. But with each visit, he noticed that the barrier he had built around himself was beginning to crack. There was something in the looks, the simple smiles, the natural way these people surrendered to the music, that awakened in him a forgotten desire to feel part of something bigger. This small victory was already significant, because until then he had believed he would never be able to connect with anyone again. The music's impact began to affect his daily life. Nights, once dominated by insomnia and nightmares, began to offer moments of rest. It wasn't perfect, but there were days when he could fall asleep with the melody still echoing in his mind. And when he woke, he realized that the feeling of emptiness had given way to a glimmer of hope. Even his smile, which had seemed lost, began to reappear in simple situations. A joke during rehearsal, a loving gesture from someone in the choir, or even in the shared silence after an intense song. These seemingly small details marked the beginning of his restoration. It was as if each rehearsal were a brick placed back into the structure of his life, slowly rebuilding something that had been destroyed by war. His mindset began to transform, from a black and white vision, filled with pain and despair, to a painting that was slowly regaining its colors. This change didn't happen overnight, but the process revealed hidden truths about himself. He discovered that he was still capable of feeling, of trusting, of believing that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because restoration isn't just about healing pain, but about reclaiming identity. By participating in the choir, or even just being present, he began to realize he was no longer just the soldier scarred by war, but someone with new possibilities. The voices around him showed him that he didn't need to carry the weight of his memories alone, because there was a community willing to share him, even without understanding the full depth of his story. And it was in this coexistence that a sense of belonging was born, something he believed he had lost forever. The impact of this journey of transformation was evident in every detail. The first time his voice timidly joined the other voices in the choir, the moment he accepted an invitation to have coffee with his colleagues after rehearsal, or the surprise of realizing that music not only healed him but also restored him to himself. It was as if the choir was more than a musical group. It was a metaphor for life. Each voice alone might seem fragile, but together, they created something powerful, capable of crossing invisible boundaries. And by being a part of it, he began to understand that his story could also be transformed, that the past didn't have to be the sentence for the future. Comment there. That makes sense to me. What began with music soon expanded into something much greater. He realized that the choir wasn't just a group of people coming together to sing, but a true community. Every rehearsal, every quick conversation before or after, every look of understanding carried profound meaning. The hugs he received weren't formal, they were sincere, the kind that seemed to say, "You don't have to carry this alone." Simple words, sometimes just a "how are you," had a huge impact because they were spoken without pressure, without judgment. It was a space where there was no need to explain in detail the ghosts that haunted him, because the welcome was present, silently and naturally. Loneliness had been his most constant companion since returning from the war. It gave him a false sense of protection, but deep down, it was a prison that further fueled the emptiness. And it was precisely the opposite of loneliness, his time with the choir, that began to open glimmers of light in his life. There he discovered that healing would not come from grand speeches but from the sum of everyday gestures. Someone offering a cup of coffee, another sharing a funny memory, a smile exchanged in the middle of a difficult song. All of this seemed small, but in fact it formed the foundation of a process of restoration much deeper than he had imagined. This experience showed that human beings need community to flourish. He had spent so long believing he had to face his invisible scars alone, that he had forgotten the power of the collective. Being surrounded by people willing to give their time, voice, and heart, without expecting anything in return, completely changed his mindset. It was like a revelation. Life gains strength when it is shared. And in the midst of that choir, he went from being just a survivor to becoming part of a network that, together, created beauty and hope. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this power of community isn't limited to just singing. What was happening behind the scenes was even more impactful. He was being emotionally re-educated, learning to trust again, to allow others to get close without fear of losing control. Each hug was a silent decision to let down his guard. Each welcoming word was an opportunity to rebuild trust in the other. The hidden truth is that collective support has the ability to heal wounds that no individual therapy could achieve alone. Music was the path, but the true medicine lay in the human bond that formed with each encounter. This was the moment he understood he didn't have to be strong all the time, that there was room for vulnerability, for tears, for venting, and by allowing himself to experience this, the transformation became even more intense. The choir's impact was not only in the notes echoing in the church, but in the echo they created within people, reminding them that there is always a place to belong. He discovered that there was no cure for loneliness, but that the key to rediscovering peace lay within the community. Comment there. That makes sense to me. He began to realize that true transformation didn't happen suddenly, but rather as an internal, silent process that unfolded day by day. With each rehearsal, with each song, a part of the past that had previously seemed unbearable began to be revisited in a different way. It wasn't about erasing memories or pretending nothing had happened, but about learning to look at them without being destroyed. It was as if the choir offered a new filter for life, a different mindset, capable of reframing even the most difficult moments. At first, he resisted. He was afraid to surrender completely, as if giving up his pain would somehow betray those who didn't return from the war. But little by little, that notion faded. The collective sound of voices showed him that it was possible to honor the past without being chained to it. This revelation was a turning point because it allowed him to begin to reconcile with himself. He stopped seeing himself as just a broken survivor, and began to see himself as a human being rebuilding, someone who still had something to offer. The nights began to become less dark. There were still bad dreams, but now there were also good memories to balance the weight. The sound of voices, the hugs he received, the simple conversations infiltrated his memory like small points of light. The fear of never finding peace again was replaced by an unexpected desire to live fully. This led him to make new decisions, to allow himself to smile, to open his heart to relationships he had previously rejected for fear of being hurt again. It was as if each step he took toward community was also a step toward a lost purpose. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what was happening wasn't just a change in routine, but an inner transformation with lasting impact. The trauma, previously seen as a prison, began to become part of a journey of revelations. He understood that he couldn't erase the past, but he could decide what to do with it. And this decision became a powerful key. From the moment he accepted his story without letting it define his future, everything began to change. His heart, previously heavy, now found lightness in simple things, in the sound of a sustained note, in the spontaneous laughter of someone nearby, in the comfortable silence of being in a group. This reconciliation with himself was the beginning of a rediscovery of purpose. He began to believe that his life could inspire others, that his story didn't have to be just about pain, but also about overcoming. The hidden truth is that suffering can become a channel of connection, and he discovered that sharing his experiences within that community had an unexpected effect. It strengthened not only himself, but also those around him. It was as if the impact of his journey multiplied, transforming scars into a source of hope. This journey led him to understand that inner transformation doesn't happen in isolation. What he experienced was proof that restoration happens when we allow ourselves to be touched by something greater than ourselves, something that breaks through our internal barriers and shows us that it's still possible to begin again. Reconciliation with the past, overcoming trauma, rediscovering purpose, all of these stopped being just nice words and became reality in his life. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The change that occurred in his life wasn't just a passing detail, but a concrete turning point that completely transformed the way he saw himself and how he related to the world. Before, his routine was marked by pain, sleepless nights, heavy silences, and the emptiness of not finding a reason to get up. Each day was like carrying a rusty suit of armor too heavy to bear. Now this reality had gradually crumbled, and in its place emerged something new: hope. Not that distant hope that seems like an unattainable dream, but a practical hope, revealed in his gestures, in his daily choices, and even in the sparkle in his eyes. The choir ceased to be just a group of tuned voices and became a living symbol of rebirth and faith, something that went beyond songs, a constant reminder that human beings are capable of reinventing themselves even after passing through the abyss. The most impressive thing is that this transformation wasn't a sudden miracle, but the result of a journey made up of small victories. He began to wake up feeling more energetic, to smile without forcing it, to find pleasure in simple things like watching the sun shine through the window in the morning or hearing the sound of falling rain without it bringing back painful memories. Before, every sudden noise was a trigger, a reminder of what had been left behind. Now the sounds of everyday life were once again just that, sounds. His heart, which had previously raced in despair, now beat in time with the music that filled his days. That choir wasn't just music. It was a place of healing, a space where he felt he belonged, and where he learned there was still room to live fully. And the impact of this spread to every area of his life. Those close to him began to notice the difference: a lighter posture, a less burdensome gaze, a more open presence. He no longer avoided conversations, no longer hid behind silence or excuses. Little by little he rediscovered the importance of connections, the strength that comes from walking alongside others. What had once been mere survival was now true life, and this life brought with it not only the feeling of being in the present, but also the boldness to dream about the future. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the new life he was experiencing wasn't simply a return to what had been before the war. It was something entirely new, built on the ruins of the past, but without denying what he had experienced. This renewed mindset was the result of a revelation. Suffering, however devastating, didn't have the final word. The trauma, which had felt like a life sentence, could become a starting point for reconstruction. He understood that pain didn't need to be erased to make way for hope. It could be integrated as part of his story, but now from a new perspective. The choir, in this sense, functioned as a metaphor for his own existence. Each voice, alone, might seem fragile and insufficient, but together they created a harmony capable of crossing invisible boundaries. And that was how he began to perceive his own life, a collection of fragments that, when accepted and united, could generate something beautiful. There was no longer a need to hide his scars, because now they told a story of transformation. This revelation freed him, and the faith that grew within him was not only religious, but also a faith in life, in the ability to move forward, in the strength of community, and in the beauty of beginning anew. Decisions previously driven by fear began to be made from a new perspective. He no longer acted as someone merely reacting to the past, but as someone creating his own future. The impact of this process was visible. If before there had been a man marked by darkness, now there was someone willing to be a light for others. His personal journey took on a collective dimension, because by sharing his story, he became a source of inspiration. The hidden truth was that by rebuilding himself, He not only found meaning for himself but also offered hope to those still trapped in their own inner labyrinths. This new life brought with it a freedom he never thought possible, the freedom to smile without guilt, to allow himself to love, to look forward without the constant shadow of what he had experienced. The choir had become his foundation, but also a reminder that life is made of choices. He chose to sing, he chose to open up, he chose to believe again. This daily choice, simple yet powerful, was what cemented his transformation. It wasn't just about singing musical notes, but about singing life itself, resonating the truth that there is always a way back, even when all seems lost. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Sometimes life restores us in ways we could never have anticipated. He had tried to find escapes in so many different places, searching for answers in memories, in silence, in escapes, but none of these strategies brought him the rest he so desperately sought. And it was precisely where he least expected it, in that church choir, that transformation began to happen. What seemed like just an ordinary rehearsal of in-tune voices became the breath of life that rekindled his hope. Each song was like a bridge built between his pain and the possibility of a new future. Each encounter was a reminder that darkness does not have the final word. The impact of this discovery was so profound that he even found himself surprised when he looked back. How could someone who believed he no longer had the strength to smile again? How could someone scarred by so many painful memories open himself to affection, to community, to faith? The choir had become more than music. It was a symbol of rebirth, a living faith expressed in melodies that seemed to stitch together his broken soul. There he understood that living wasn't just about existing, but about learning to begin again, even while bearing scars. And this new beginning didn't erase the pain, but showed it could be transformed into something different, something capable of inspiring. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this revelation reveals a hidden truth we often forget. We don't need something grand to live again, but rather a space where we can be welcomed. Life has its backstage moments, places where transformation happens silently, away from everyone's gaze. For him, the choir was precisely that backstage moment. It was there that his mindset shifted, his decisions took on new meaning, and his journey found meaning. The trauma wasn't erased, but integrated into a larger narrative, where pain ceased to be an end and became the beginning of a new stage. This experience taught him that the greatest revelations arise when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. It was by walking, almost unintentionally, through an open door that he found what he had been searching for without knowing it. It was by allowing himself to listen, even before believing, that he discovered that music could heal. And it was by opening himself to the collective that he realized that strength lay not in carrying the burden alone, but in sharing it. This process of restoration is a powerful testament to how seemingly small decisions can have a gigantic impact on a life. And here's what this journey reveals. Sometimes life restores us in unexpected ways. For him, it was through the church choir that everything changed, that heaviness turned to lightness, and that hope gave way to faith. He learned to live again, not because the pain disappeared, but because hope shone brighter than the memories again. This is the kind of story that reminds us to look beyond the surface, to believe that even in the ruins, something new can still be born. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, I think this story spoke to you in some way. That's why I want to invite you to continue walking with me. If this content resonated with you, made you reflect, or even moved you, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. That way you'll continue receiving stories that strengthen, inspire, and remind you that there's always a way back to life. And since we've shared so much together so far, please leave a like because it's a simple way to show that this connection made sense. Oh, and to show that you were truly with me until the end, comment, "This message was for me." It will be special to see who stayed until the last minute of this journey. And look, you don't have to stop here. There's a video right here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there.